If I was to ask you which Germanic kingdoms come first to your mind that settled on the territory of the Western Roman Empire during the era of the Great Migrations, you might first think of the Franks, or maybe of the Visigoths, or of the Vandals. But a Germanic state that is quite often overlooked due to its smaller size, but which still played a very important role in the downfall of the Western Roman Empire, was the Burgundian kingdom. The, on this channel admittedly often repeated, decisive moment in the fall of the Western Roman Empire was the fateful New Year's Eve of the year 406 AD. On that day, and in the following weeks, several Germanic tribes attempted to cross the frozen river Rhine into the province of Gallia, the Roman province which lay within the Western Roman Empire. These tribes were the Vandals, the Alani, the Suevi, and the Burgundians. These people had lived before somewhere in Germania or to the east of Germania and were part of the great migrations that took place in those times. The Visigoths had already invaded the Roman Empire earlier, in 376 and following years. In 406, the Franks were an allied tribe of Rome, which the Emperor Julian had settled in the province of Gallia Belgica. Unfortunately, the Rhine border had been depleted of troops by the Western Roman general Stilicho for the protection of Italy, which saw repeated attacks by massive Germanic armies, one after the other. So Stilicho had no choice but to withdraw troops from the Rhine border in order to defend Italy. And so the Frankish foederati, as the allied Germanic soldiers were called back then, had to fight all these Germanic tribes on their own. Needless to say that despite initial successes, sooner or later they were overwhelmed due to the sheer mass of Germanics crossing the river Rhine. And among those tribes were the Burgundians. After breaching the Rhine, they settled in the Roman province of Germania Secunda, along the Middle Rhine. They chose the town of Borbetomagus as their capital city, the modern-day city of Worms. This was done under the pretext of imperial Roman authority, since Gundobad, king of the Burgundians, together with Goar, king of the Alani, chose the Roman Jovinus and made him their puppet emperor, who then granted them the right to settle on Roman territory in exchange for allegiance as foederati of Rome. Jovinus was later killed by the Visigoths, but the imperial decree of Jovinus was begrudgingly accepted by the Western Roman Emperor Honorius, since the West did not have the necessary troop strength to deal with all different Germanic tribes at once. And so for about 2 decades, the Burgundians were accepted on the territory of the Western Roman Empire, even though we don't exactly know how many foederati they actually contributed to the Western Roman army. And for a while, they were content. But as so often, the Germanics were rarely content with the lands that they were granted by the Romans. They had the constant desire to enlarge their quasi-independent realms to the detriment of the Western Roman Empire. Because the larger these Germanic lands became, the less tax revenue this meant for the Western Romans, and this in turn worsened their ability to maintain a properly working army, since a large army, of course, costs a lot of money to maintain. And so in the 430s, Gundobad began raiding Roman territory outside of his realm. A terrible mistake, as he should soon learn, because in those times, the Magister Militum Aetius was the general of the West, and he had enough of the Burgundians and their aggressive behavior. And so he assembled an army consisting largely of Hunnic foederati, and with this army, he utterly crushed the Burgundians in 436. Gundobad was killed, and so utterly were the Burgundians defeated that this crushing defeat would be recounted for centuries, and later would serve as the basis for the epic poem of the Nibelungenlied, which was written some 760 years later. If you are a fan of Roman history and you would want to buy an item for yourself or someone else as a present, then you might want to consider the SPQR Shop. They produce incredible replicas of Roman history with a very high attention to detail. All their items are carefully handcrafted, and I think it will be difficult to find that level of craftsmanship anywhere else. They handcraft Roman coin replicas, rings, pendants, attributes, and many other items of Roman history. If you want to support the channel, or if you want to buy a present for someone who likes Roman history, please go and check out their excellent site, link in the description. If you buy over this link, you will receive a 20% price reduction, which I personally find very generous. Thank you very much for your consideration, and back to the video. The Burgundians were then resettled to the region of Maxima Sequanorum in 443. As before, they were content again. For a while. Because as always with the Germanics, they just waited for the right time to enlarge their possessions. In 451, they even helped the Western Roman Empire under their king Gunderic, when the Burgundians, together with Aetius and his Roman army, and with the Visigoths, inflicted a defeat onto Attila, his Huns, and his Germanic allies at the famous Battle of the Catalonian Plains. This is one of those rare moments when the Burgundians did actually help Rome. But as you can guess, this wouldn't stay so. After the murder of the Western Roman general Flavius Aetius, and then later after the murder of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, they used the ensuing chaos to their advantage and managed to greatly enlarge their domain, conquering the large city of Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, and coming dangerously close to the Mediterranean Sea. In 459, the Emperor Maiorianus himself, the greatest of the late Western Roman emperors, inflicted a heavy defeat on them, liberating the city of Lugdunum and driving the Burgundians back, even forcing them back into foederati status, forcing them to serve once again in the Roman army. Unfortunately though, after the heroic Emperor Maiorianus was treacherously murdered by his ungrateful general Ricimer, there was nobody who would now oppose the Burgundian expansion, and so they immediately expanded again and reconquered the territory which they had lost to the Romans under Maiorianus. It was now in those times that the Burgundians would even manage to ascend the ranks of the Roman army to such a degree that they would even act as the power behind the Western Roman throne. For the Burgundian king Gunderic, the same Gunderic who fought with Aetius against the Huns, had a son called Gundobad. The wife of Gunderic was the sister of none other than Ricimer, the barbarian Magister Militum, and so Gundobad was the nephew of Ricimer, the Western Roman Magister Militum who had held effective military power in the West from 456 until 472. So for around 16 years. When Ricimer finally died in 472, having murdered countless emperors and generals, leaving the Western Roman Empire in a disastrous situation, the time of the Burgundians finally came to shine. Ricimer had died in August of 472, and so it fell to Gundobad to take over the role of Magister Militum and patrician of the Western Roman Empire. We can assume that he held a powerful influence over the then reigning Western Roman Emperor Olybrius. Olybrius, however, died already in November of that same year, and so Gundobad chose Glycerius in March 473, the Comes Domesticorum, the leader of the palace guard, as the new emperor of the West. But later in 473, or possibly also in 474, Gundobad's father, Gunderic, the king of the Burgundians, died. His three brothers, Godegisel, Chilperic II and Gundomar, challenged Gundobad's claim to the throne. In addition, Julius Nepos landed in 474 with an army of the Eastern Roman Empire at Portus near Rome, and so Gundobad went back to the Burgundian kingdom to deal with this problem, but possibly also in order to avoid a confrontation with Julius Nepos. Once back in the Burgundian kingdom, he basically just brutally murdered all his opponents one by one, and so became king of the Burgundians in 480. He really was a brutal and ruthless guy, every bit his uncle Ricimer. It was Gundobad, after all, who had also personally killed the Western Roman Emperor Anthemius. But one of his brothers, Godegisel, put up a hell of a fight, and so Gundobad would only kill him as late as 501. In 490, while Theoderic and Odoacer were fighting for control over Italy, Gundobad seized the opportunity and sent an army into Italy, raiding Liguria and taking many Roman prisoners, who were then later returned by Theoderic for ransom. Gundobad died in 516 AD, leaving the Burgundian kingdom to his elder son Sigismund. But then war with the Franks broke out, and from 523 to 534 the conflict raged on. In 532 then, Godomar, the younger son of Gundobad, was king, and he lost to the Franks at the Battle of Autun. And thus was the Burgundian kingdom annexed and incorporated into the Frankish realm not long later in 534, and Godomar was killed. Only a few years later, in 539, the Burgundians were sent by the Franks to Italy to take part in the war of the Ostrogoths against the Eastern Roman Empire, and they would be part of a Gothic army which would commit terrible atrocities in the sack of Mediolanum. About 30,000 people were mercilessly killed, and the Burgundians took an active part in that brutal massacre. For the next centuries, the Burgundian kingdom would, now come to be known as Burgundy, stay basically in the same region. And the Frankish kings would also use the title King of Burgundy, in addition to King of the Franks. Indeed, the region of Burgundy would at times be an independent kingdom again, and continue in one form or another until 1477, when Burgundy would come to a definitive end as an independent or quasi-independent political entity, and subsequently became a province of France. Hence, the region in the area of the ancient Burgundian kingdom is still known as Burgundy even today, even though it's not precisely, of course, where the old Burgundian kingdom was located. It migrated over the centuries somewhat to the north and now belongs to a larger administrative region that is north of the ancient Burgundian kingdom. And so the Burgundians are often overlooked, but we could see that they played an important role in the Western Roman Empire and certainly contributed to its fall, like the other Germanic kingdoms, using every chance they had to increase the size of their realm and to meddle in Roman politics, most often to the detriment of the Romans, of course. Only once, at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, did they decisively help the Romans, and so we could call the Burgundians not really friends of Rome, but also not total enemies. They were somewhere in between, and they certainly are an often overlooked kingdom that is certainly deserving of attention in these chaotic times when the Western Roman Empire fell. If you liked this video, please consider supporting this channel via Patreon or via a YouTube membership, because it is your support which makes this channel possible. You would have my utmost gratitude. And of course, I want to thank everybody who supports Maiorianus. You are all amazing. And if you want to learn more about the kingdom of the Franks, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about the kingdom of the Vandals, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.